Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to begin. Members of the media, we want to welcome you to the closing news conference for the 47th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of CDB. Today we are pleased to have with us the Honorable Charlene Cartwright Robinson, and Premier of the Turks and Caicos Islands, under whose chairmanship these meetings were held, as well as our President, Dr. William Warren Smith. I will now invite the Premier, followed by the President, to share brief comments reflecting on the annual meeting proceedings. Premier?
Thank you. I can certainly say on behalf of the people of the Turks and Caicos, it was a pleasure to welcome in the many governors and heads of state and CDB to the Turks and Caicos Islands for this 47th annual meeting. We are very pleased that they chose Turks and Caicos last year, and we were able to continue that even with elections in the middle. We were able to fulfill that obligation on the part of our country. We believe we've had a very productive few days, and what this conference has certainly done for us is remind us that we are in a region that we have more in common than we have that divides us. And so it's important going forward that we look at ways that we can work together, ways that we can continue to build a region together for the betterment of all of us. So I'm indeed delighted that the President and CDB is here, and we've just concluded these meetings that we think were very, very productive for the way forward.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I think I can say with all honesty that in spite of the fact that this place, this country, these beautiful islands are perhaps better known for leisure and relaxation, that we came here to do business and we got the business done. In large part because of the expert chairmanship of the Premier of Turks and Caicos Islands. I want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank her for helping us to have a successful annual meeting. There were many highlights of the last few days, and the ones that are particularly memorable for me were the discussions that we had this morning with our shareholders when we talked about the future of our institution and exchanged very, very frank discussions on several matters. That's the way in which business is done in the CDB. We in the leadership of the bank, we believe that it is our responsibility to recognize the risks and opportunities that are there for CDB and to share them with our governors and to get their feedback and their response. We got that this morning. I think also that we were buoyed, our sense of achievement was elevated by the reaction of our Special Development Fund contributors who felt that we had done a very good job in achieving good results and also being able to complete the Special Development Fund negotiations with a good outcome against a more difficult external environment. So those are two things that will stand out in my mind. But overall, it was a really excellent meeting. We don't like to characterize meetings in terms of which one was better than the other, but this one certainly stands out as one of the best in my time. So thanks again, Premier.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. At this time, we are pleased to open the floor for questions for the media. If you can, please use the mics that are around the perimeter. Just touch the button and pose your questions. Please indicate to the person who you wish to answer each question. Thanks.
Yeah. Good afternoon, DeAndre Hamilton with Magnetic Media, based here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. I guess in listening to your closing statement, Mr. President, I heard you mention that the CDB has managed to, I guess, climb in appreciation with Standard & Poor's and Moody's. What do you think attributes, or that is attributed to?
You know, the rating agencies, they're primarily concerned with risk. They look at us through the lens of a financial institution. And as I was explaining this morning, just after the international financial crisis, the way in which those institutions looked at institutions like ours was that they saw very little distinction between us and a commercial bank, certainly from the standpoint of risk, so that what we have been doing over the last few years is we have been trying to carry through reforms which help us to manage the kinds of risks that are important to the rating agencies. And it's not because we have very big egos and we want to boast a strong credit rating. It is because if we do not have a strong credit rating, we cannot raise funds at interest rates that are lower than what the high quality credits like Turks and Caicos can achieve, which then would undermine and diminish our value. That is it in a nutshell. So that's the you know, the sort of financial side of our business. But the rating agencies also recognize the value that we bring from a development perspective. And I must tell you that they're very impressed with what CDB has been able to achieve on that front. They were particularly impressed that the UK government felt it was prudent to intermediate £300 million of grant resources through the Caribbean Development Bank. That was a big, big feather in our hat. So I think all of those things combined would help to explain why we were able to equalize our credit rating. Thanks.
Next question.
Okay.
Nicola.
Dr. Smith, the bank has or is being described as an agent of change in the region. Given the uncertainty when it comes to global growth, which is definitely a threat to the region in terms of our low growth levels already and infrastructure development, what recommendation, if you had to sum it up, would you make to the region for us to ride the wave per se and make it to shore? Because there are high levels of uncertainty at this time.
Well, that's a very good question. And I was saying this morning that this country, Turks and Caicos Islands, I think is a good example of how small, vulnerable states can mitigate risk and shocks, external shocks in particular. What you do is manage your economy well and create buffers. That's the way to do it. And one of the buffers that Turks and Caicos Island has invested in is buying insurance from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which we're going to talk about shortly. And what that has done is when Hurricane Ike hit you, a few days after that event, you were able to draw down, I think it was $8 million or something thereabouts. That probably did not take care of all the damage, but what it did is it gave you some cash flow in the immediate aftermath of the crisis to fix some things that were very, very urgent. The other thing is what is now underway, which is to create a buffer in the form of a fund for the future. In other words, in the good times, you save, you set aside resources so that you can use them in the bad times, which are inevitable. That is the nature of vulnerability. So that's what I would say is, is the sort of advice that we would give to our borrowing member countries. Follow the example of Turks and Caicos. They're doing some very, very admirable things that all of us could emulate. Thanks, Madam Chair.
I'll just chime in there because I can certainly say that the insurance was important for us to have had. And in this year alone already, we have expanded our coverage for flooding. So we are solidifying our position and our relationship with CRIF. But also to say that it is important that there is savings for those rainy days. And in a few days, actually next week, we will be having the second reading and hopefully the passage of the Turks and Caicos National Wealth Fund, where we will do just that, where we are producing now surplus budgets, and we would want to ensure that we are saving in different ways. The bill will actually introduce several funds, and one that we are particularly proud of is the Infrastructure Fund and the Heritage Fund that allows us to put monies away towards major infrastructural projects. Of course, there's the fund for rainy day, and then, of course, for heritage, where we'll continue in terms of preservation of our culture and our heritage.
Thank you, Premier. Chris?
Thank you very much. Premier, as the chair for the CDB for this year, what were some of the highlights for you and the achievements that you have achieved in this go-round before handing off the reins?
I've achieved the chairmanship of a successful conference above anything else. I think what will rest with me more than anything is the assistance that was agreed for Montserrat. That is perhaps one of the thing that will last most in my mind, lasting memory, because it is important in the Caribbean that we bear one another's burdens, and as borrowing member countries and as CDB continues to be there for us, we ought to be there for each other. So that for me is perhaps the feather in my cap, I would say, in chairing this meeting. And then, of course, there are other intimate issues in the bank that were lingering, and we were being able to resolve them in this setting. But also, I think the dialogue that we've had, very stimulating, very thought-provoking, and a number of seminars on very important topics that shows that there must be greater regional collaboration and cooperation, and that is tourism and enhancing growth, looking this afternoon even further at foreign direct investment, which is all we talk about in Turks and Caicos, and how do we enhance the ease of doing business. But I think most important for all of us in vulnerable states like Turks and Caicos is the signing of the line of credit from EIB, and that is for climate change. I think a lot of us are still at a place where we haven't created the public awareness that we should have by now. The truth is, whether we want to admit it or not, we're feeling it. We're feeling the change, and it's important that we understand that we can't avoid it, but we must build resiliency for climate change, and I look forward to talking to CDB a bit more on that line of credit and building our resiliency here in Turks and Caicos due to climate change.
Thank you, Premier. Peter?
Dr. Smith, Peter Richards, CMC. You spoke about the expansion of membership of the CDB. This is one of the areas you're looking at. Are you going beyond the BMCs? And if so, are you looking now towards regional institutions? Because I would think the 15 or how many Caribbean countries, I cannot see how the expansion is speaking about going. If you're saying that the CDB is a Caribbean, or as Camilo Gonzalez says, the unique Caribbeanness about the CDB.
Good question. Let me start by saying that we have absolutely no intention of changing the essential character and mission of the Caribbean Development Bank, which is to develop the Caribbean countries. That is why we were established, and that is what we'll always be about. But the reality is that we live in a world that is changing, and if we don't change, we're not going to be able to carry out that mission. So what we're looking to do is to take initiatives that allow us to address our vulnerabilities, whilst at the same time maintain the capacity to carry out our mission. That is really what underpins the proposals that we're putting forward to our governors. And we're absolutely confident that over time, as the dialogue goes along, we'll arrive at a comfortable conclusion and one that is in the interest of the bank and the region.
If you don't mind. So therefore, you're not ruling out the possibility, for example, of regional institutions rather than countries becoming BMCs, to some, if I could put it that way.
Okay, I didn't realize that's where you're going, but let me put it this way to you. Let me state what is possible, but not necessarily what is likely. What is possible? Our charter was changed about 11 years ago. There was a change in the charter, let me put it that way, where institutions, not just countries, could become members of the Caribbean Development Bank. We at the time were targeting a particular institution in Europe, which was very, very key to us and to our credit quality and our source of funding. That did not work out at the time, but we didn't go back in and change the charter to what it was originally, so that provision is still in there. So theoretically, a Caribbean institution could join the CDB, but I'm not aware of one on the horizon at this time, which we might be prepared to reach out to. And that's no discredit to quality of the institutions that we have in this region, but this is the banking side of the CDB talking here, and the criteria are very, very strict. Okay?
Geraldine?
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Smith and Chairwoman. De-risking has arisen as one of the major issues facing the financial services sector of several Caribbean countries. What is the CDB doing to directly influence or assist the region in this pressing issue?
Okay. Well, I think you should also ask the Premier to comment on that issue, on the issue of de-risking, because I am sure that she is aware of the risks if the Turks and Caicos haven't themselves already been impacted. But from the CDB perspective, this is one of the biggest dangers to our growth and development that we have faced in recent times. It is so because we're small, open economies, and for that reason, we have to depend very heavily on trade. You cannot engage in trade if you can't engage with the international financial system. You have got to be able to move money in and out of your country. It's as simple as that. So it is something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be resolved. The resolution is not a simple one. There are very, very many moving parts here. What I think is one of the things that it was within our control, because there are several things that are not necessarily within our control, is we need to ensure that our jurisdictions are credible, that we cannot be accused of being vulnerable to quote-unquote dirty money. So that is what is within our control, and I think that that is where we need to place the greatest attention. What we have at the CDB have proposed is that we will work with our countries to provide the resources for them to have their jurisdictions assessed on a regular basis to ensure that their jurisdictions are in good order and that are therefore not vulnerable to the types of risks that I referred to. There are a variety of quote-unquote solutions which have been proffered, including by ourselves, by staff in our bank. And if you go on our website, you'll see a couple of articles that have been written, which have been credibly received by the region and others. But the point is that I don't think we are at the point yet where we have found the silver bullet, but it is a work in progress.
Certainly it is a danger for the entire region, and Turks and Caicos, small, is certainly not immune to this. The challenge that we're finding in Turks and Caicos, and let me say before I proceed to our own experience, CARICOM has this item on its agenda and has placed it there in February, looking at corresponding banking and, of course, the entire issue of de-risking. But here in Turks and Caicos, what we're finding is an attempt to de-risk entire sectors, and that is not that is not the way to go. We are trying to, for example, assess our financial services sector. We are complying with the various standards that are there, and it seems as if the goalpost is moving every time we comply with another standard, and everybody else is coming up with their own standard, if I can say it that way. But we find that it's very difficult in trying to grow this sector to have de-risking becoming such an issue. It is certainly a danger for us. But apart from that, our concern is also that we're looking at the gaming industry, a sector that is a threat now for being de-risked, being a de-risking issue, de-risking the entire sector. It is important as we look at the solution and those who are bringing this forward that the idea is to avoid dirty money, but to also move away from what may become the result. If you're choosing not to bank a particular sector, then you're encouraging them to move suitcases of money. I mean, it sounds simple because it is. You're actually accomplishing what you're trying to move away from. And so you have the money centers. You have the casinos, standalone casinos. You have to then step back and realize what exactly it is that you're trying to achieve, and realize those that are putting it forward may in fact be driving some countries to the path that they're trying to have them avoid. So it is an issue here for us. It is being discussed at CARICOM level, and of course, it certainly is high on the radar here in Turks and Caicos.
If I could follow up, referencing the situation in Barbados, during the days that I was here, I was reading online, we have a situation where banks in Barbados are refusing to accept the money from slot machine operators, and they cite the response to them as an institution by accepting these funds. Do you think it may come to the point, Dr. Smith, and you can also answer this question as well, do you think it may come to the point where the region may have to even approach the UN, for example, and indicate that this situation poses a clear and present danger to the stability of the entire region?
I know one thing that is clear. The region has to present a united front, because whilst that is happening in Barbados, it is happening in Turks and Caicos, it is happening in other Caribbean countries, and what we have to do is present a united front. And hopefully out of our deliberations at CARICOM and even with CDB, that we will come to the place and agree very, very quickly, because it is a clear and present danger. We have bank accounts that have been closed, that are continuing to do business here in Turks and Caicos. And it is not just our fight alone, it's a fight for the region, and we have to very quickly decide who we're going to approach and how we're going to approach them, but more importantly, collectively, how we're going to do it together.
I don't have much more to add to that. I think the Premier has answered it adequately. Thanks.
We've got time for one final question before we move into the launch proceedings. Nicola?
I guess based on the response from my colleague's last question, and Madam Premier, you can answer, as well as Dr. Smith, I'd like to get your feedback. We acknowledge that driving economic growth has to be a collaborative effort. And given the discussions this morning, Minister Bartlett would have made a very valid point. I'm thinking of Caribbean tourism. Are we in a space and place for that? What do we need to do? And Madam Premier, if we're not, is the TCI willing to take the lead to show that it can happen, given the fact that once you visit the Turks and Caicos, you'll always want to come back?
Turks and Caicos is small and we're prepared to lead. But there are so many areas, and tourism is the most recent, of course, that we would have heard in a seminar this morning, that we can actually have regional cooperation and collaboration. I do know one of the models that the Minister of Tourism from Jamaica wants to put forward is that multi-destination experience. And I think once we get past Caribbean egos, you know, those stumbling blocks that were a part of causing the Federation years ago not to work, I think we can do a lot more together. We are very individual, very unique, and I think the point to sell is that we're all going to benefit. We're all going to benefit, and once we can get past that, then we do have a greater chance of being that great region that I always believe and will always believe, being a true Caribbean girl, that we're tinkering on the edge of greatness. And it's until we lose, to a certain extent, that individualism, we're not going to push the region and ourselves forward.
Again, I don't have a whole lot more to add to that point. I think that I think you probably heard it on Wednesday. I am very, very much solidly behind a collaborative Caribbean, a connected Caribbean, and the Caribbean tourism industry is one of the largest of those industries. I see a mature approach is one that recognizes the possibilities in connective development of our tourism industry. I've been around for quite a while, and I remember the days after 9/11 when suddenly everybody was talking about, oh, we need to advertise the Caribbean as a destination. And I think you probably heard something along those lines in the presentation on tourism today. How Canada, for example, advertises itself. You know, you advertise Canada, and then you advertise Toronto or Edmonton or whatever. But that's how you do it. So it's not dissimilar to how we would treat with the Caribbean. When Cuba came into the market, one of the questions I was asked very early on was, is Cuba going to destroy the tourism industry for the rest of the Caribbean? And I said, no. What Cuba will do is enlarge the market. And then what we will do is we will step up our game to make sure that we get a part of that enlarged market. Having been to this country, I don't think they need to worry about anything. I think they have an outstanding product, and a couple of days in Cuba and a few more days here in Turks and Caicos with a much larger number of people coming into the Caribbean is good for everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Premier. At this time, we're going to ask the media to remain in place. We're going to launch a very special project. So it's a bit of a revolving door. Just bear with us while we get the other gentleman in position. Thank you. All right, thank you. Gentlemen, please sit. Have a seat. Huh? Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, all right. Please have a seat. Are we good? All right, so thank you for joining us for the CRIF Integrated Sovereign Risk Management in the Caribbean project. We have with us, starting our president, as you know, Warren Smith, Dr. Warren Smith. We have Malcolm Buama, who was the Chief Risk Officer of the Caribbean Development Bank, to his left. And to the president's right, Mr. Isaac Anthony, CEO of CRIF SBC. First, we're going to invite Dr. Smith to deliver brief opening remarks, followed by Mr. Isaac Anthony, and then Malcolm Buama, our Chief Risk Officer. Dr. Smith?
Thank you very much, Suan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launch of the Integrated Sovereign Risk Management in the Caribbean project, a joint initiative between CRIF SPC, formerly the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and the Caribbean Development Bank. We are honored to be participating with CRIF on yet another groundbreaking initiative geared to advance the sustainability of the small island and coastal states of the Caribbean. CRIF, as you know, is the world's first multi-country risk pool based on parametric insurance. It has been providing parametric catastrophe insurance since 2007. The facility has been offering coverage for the Caribbean and since 2014 for Central American governments. It offers insurance, it offers hurricane, earthquake, and excess rainfall coverage, and also provides financial liquidity when a country's policy is triggered, making payouts within as little as 14 days after an event. This parametric insurance tool is the main ex-ante financing option available in the Caribbean. Last year, CRIF made 9 payouts totaling over $31 million to 6 member countries, which carried its tropical cyclone and excess rainfall, which triggered its tropical cyclone and excess rainfall and/or earthquake policies. Sorry about that. These countries were affected by 4 events: Hurricanes Earl, Matthew, and Otto, as well as an earthquake that affected Nicaragua in June. Since 2007, CRIF has made 22 payouts totaling over $69 million to 10 member governments. About a year and a half ago, CRIF CEO, Mr. Isaac Anthony, who is here with us this afternoon, requested that we meet to discuss country risk management in the Caribbean. In that discussion, he lamented that, innovative as it was, CRIF's risk management mechanism for providing cost-effective risk transfer was not enough. Demanding guy. CRIF's risk management mechanism for providing cost-effective risk transfer was not enough. Member countries still needed to embrace a more proactive approach towards country risk management, one that would take them beyond planning just for disaster risks such as climate change and extreme natural hazard events, and that would recognize the intrinsic linkages between disaster risk and other types of risk, such as economic, technological, and financial, and their impact on socio-economic development. He invited CDB to partner with CRIF in rolling out such a region-wide initiative, focusing on integrated risk management and looking beyond disaster and climate-related risks. I personally was intrigued by the proposal and immediately asked our Chief Risk Officer, Mr. Malcolm Buama, who is to my left here, to work alongside CRIF to develop the project concept. In 2016, our 2 organizations signed a letter of intent, which anchored our relationship and set out clear rules of engagement. Already, we have prepared and agreed on a work plan that will guide project implementation following this launch and over the next few months. We at CDB feel that CRIF is an ideal partner on this project. We have been undertaking work in holistic risk management for a few years and can use the expertise we have developed in-house to advance similar efforts region-wide. Just about 4 years ago, CDB adopted an enterprise risk management framework. This framework has not only strengthened CDB's risk management infrastructure, but also promises a range of benefits, including reduced losses due to improved controls, increased compliance with international regulatory requirements and standards, more effective mitigation measures, increased transparency, and sound governance. Today, there are significant shifts in the frequency, impact, and very nature of risks that regional governments face. Major global changes over the last 30 years have increased vulnerabilities in most Caribbean countries and created more uncertainty regarding risks, as seemingly distant events cascade into transnational shocks. We applaud the ongoing efforts of many of our members to take account of the full spectrum of risks that they face and to make the appropriate adjustments to their risk management strategies. And we are pleased that through this project, CDB can support in a meaningful way the initiatives that these countries are making. Both CRIF and CDB will be contributing resources to finance the implementation of this project. I'm looking forward to the unfolding of activities over the next few months and the involvement of regional governments, which are the main beneficiaries, and key regional organizations such as CARICOM, SEDIMA, and the OECS, as well as our international development partners. Their combined roles will be crucial in ensuring that regional and national risk management strategies are comprehensive in nature and promote more integrated and effective forms of risk management. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Mr. Anthony?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. On behalf of CRIF SPC, formerly the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, I am honored to be here at this launch of this project, Integrated Sovereign Risk Management in the Caribbean. And CRIF is excited by the outcomes that will emerge once implementation begins. We are delighted to be partnering with the Caribbean Development Bank on this initiative and hope that as the project unfolds, we will be able to bring additional partners on board. Essentially, sovereign risk management at the national level considers risk beyond natural disasters and catastrophes, and it follows from the duty of states to protect the people and environment from a range of hazards and risks that they may potentially face. In other words, this project is intended to enable countries in the region to become more resilient by enhancing the capacity of governments to take a portfolio view of risk and include all risk categories and their interdependence, from technical, economic, natural, to social risk in a geographic context. CRIP therefore proposes that governments in the region take a more modern approach to risk management and pay particular attention to two new developments in country risk management: all hazards policy frameworks, integrating information from a diverse set of governing bodies and the private sector, and national risk assessment. Both these developments form part of a broader framework of risk governance. Such an all-hazard approach demands a high level of coordination across government, political and private sector bodies, academia, and the insurance sector. As such, within this governance framework is the notion of establishing a country risk coordinator within countries as part of the overarching governance framework. These country risk coordinators would be responsible for managing the overall risk landscape, taking a holistic approach to risk before events occur, and ultimately reducing the risk burden to society. In other words, country risk coordinators significantly aid in identification of risk at the national level as well as in risk assessments, mitigation, and adaptation, thereby reducing possible domestic national risk faced by each country, as well as the collective risk faced by the region due to the strong economic, social, and political ties between the countries in the region. Importantly, too, these coordinators assist with developing strategies to address these risks identified, adopting a proactive, precautionary approach to anticipating future challenges, thereby avoiding governments being caught by surprise and forced into a fully reactive mode of simply putting out fires. For instance, while our countries could never be completely insulated from the impacts of exogenous shocks such as the global financial crisis as we experienced in 2008, our ability to respond depends largely on our ability to anticipate such risk and put measures in place to mitigate the impact of such risk. The same can be said for the impact of sudden sharp increases in world oil prices, food prices, and other commodity prices. While most countries in the region may not have an integrated risk management framework in place, many governments are currently undertaking useful initiatives that could contribute to the integrated framework that this project is proposing. There may be lessons that can be learned from the current country practices. Under this initiative, then, we will seek to identify and document existing best practices in the risk management in the region, recognizing that lessons learned in this area are adaptable to country-specific realities. We envisage the implementation of a few key initiatives over the next few months to advance the implementation of this initiative. Some of these areas are: 1, a situation analysis of risk management framework of practices within the CRIF member countries and CDB borrowing member countries. This situation analysis also will form the basis for the development of a register for lessons learned that will be part of the standardized integrated risk management framework. 2, a country comparative analysis of integrated risk management frameworks, which will identify best practices in integrated risk management globally and document lessons learned, etc. 3, a gap analysis, which will be based on the comparative analysis and situational analysis and will illustrate the key differences between the current situation of the countries assessed and the international best practice in country risk management. The gap also will provide necessary information related to the capacity development needs in risk management across countries. 4, development of standardized integrated risk management framework, one that is both simple and cost-effective to implement. This framework will also provide: 1, the context and guidance of how an enterprise risk management framework could be integrated with a national risk management framework, and 2, a roadmap to facilitate integrated and institutionalization and mainstreaming of integrated risk management at the national level. 5, development of a draft terms of reference for country risk coordinators, and 6, hosting of a regional conference in sovereign risk management as we seek to take a participatory approach to developing the standardized and integrated risk management framework. We at CRIF look forward to playing our part in implementing this exciting initiative. We view this project as a bold one, a call to action, one that will not only impact the way we live now in the region, but one that will shape the lives of generations yet to come, all towards advancing the Agenda 2030 and the global goals for sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. And finally, our Chief Risk Officer, Malcolm Buama, who will tie it all together. Malcolm?
Thank you, Swan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and the media. I join Dr. Smith and Mr. Anthony in expressing my support and enthusiasm for this partnership between the Caribbean Development Bank and CRIF SPC to establish a regional sovereign management platform for the benefit of the governments and people of the Caribbean. The partnership will allow for countries to adopt a more proactive approach towards managing their sovereign risks within a comprehensive physical framework. As Dr. Smith indicated, it moves beyond planning for disaster risks and recognizes the links to other threats, including, but not limited to, economic, technological, financial, socioeconomic, and green economy transition risks. The platform can help to ensure that country risks are managed holistically, resources are allocated accordingly, and delegated officers, called country risk coordinators, are appointed to ensure country risks are effectively managed on a continuous basis. The benefits of this initiative are immense and include maintaining country ratings, reducing external rating downgrades, providing assurance for accessing international financing at competitive rates, sharing risk intelligence across the Caribbean region, sharing effective sovereign risk mitigation strategies, strengthening fiscal discipline, and improving country management and economic performance. The framework is being designed, taking into consideration not only the external threats facing the region, but also the trajectory of international regulatory drivers and rating agency methodologies to ensure it remains fit for purpose over the long term. It, however, recognizes the unique differences in countries and will therefore provide a menu of options that enables countries to apply the framework in a manner unique to their circumstances, whilst remaining consistent with the regional approach. To support the initiative, CDB will utilize its experience and lessons from its own integrated enterprise risk management framework, which was successfully introduced in 2013 and has strengthened its operating environment and brought about a range of benefits, including strengthening the bank's brand from a governance perspective, ensuring compliance with international standards, applying effective country risk exposure management, linking enterprise risks to capital adequacy, implementation of robust operational controls, and application of stress testing and scenario approach to planning. Our efforts have been consistently recognized by all three rating agencies, which have, in addition to other factors, upgraded the bank's rating to a AA+ stable rating. These have contributed to our ability to access competitive international funding, including our extremely successful first bond entry in the Swiss markets, adding to our previous success in the US market. It is again this backdrop that CDB is pleased to partner with CRIF SPC. We will collaborate on a series of events in the region leading towards the implementation of a standardized integrated sovereign risk management framework across all Caribbean countries. In a few months' time, we look forward to hosting a regional conference which will provide an opportunity for a more fulsome discussion on how countries in the region can utilize this innovative approach to inform policy actions over the medium to long term. I thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. And members of the media, you have before you press materials, including a release on the initiative. If you have any questions, please let me know and we'll arrange for follow-up interviews. Thank you. Gentlemen, for a photo opportunity, Renaud, just stand.